What's up? Hey, hello everyone. Wow, so today we are back going to be talking about Survivor season 47, episode 11. We are in the home stretch here. So my name is Rachel.
I'm Alyssa, and even though we're in the home stretch, I don't feel like we're in the home stretch. I feel like one of the weird things about having like 5 people going into the finale is it's like you don't feel like you're at the end because so many people go home so quickly in that last finale episode. But we are getting close to the end.
Which is pretty wild. So, like December 4th, this upcoming Wednesday, is the last real episode ish. And then the 11th and the 18th, the final 2 weeks, apparently they're doing a finale part 1 and a finale part 2. So, this will be very interesting to see like what finale part 1 and part 2 means.
Spicy, spicy, spicy. So I'm sure that we'll get more information as we get closer. But yeah, we're really coming up on the end.
Yeah, so with the end coming up, end games, people are trying to figure out their final 3 plans here. Seemingly, now we've gotten confirmation. Last week, we were like, oof, this might not be a very good move for Kyle to vote out Gabe last week because then Kyle has no shields. The next time he loses, he's probably going to get voted out. What we see this week, the next time that Kyle loses, he ends up going home. We also, when Genevieve wanted Saul out, we're suspecting, okay, maybe this isn't the best move for Genevieve. Now that she's been on the chopping block last week and this week, sort of, you might be, okay, confirmation, hindsight bias. The Saul vote wasn't that good for Genevieve either.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is confirmation bias, where there's a world where I feel like those votes could have been good for both of those people, but I think that the thing that kind of is screwing them over right now is just the 5 have realized that 5 is bigger than 3, and it'll be curious to see, like, moving forward, whether Sam and Genevieve remain the targets or if we're going to get a shakeup.
I think it'll be interesting given the preview for next week. We start this week off with Caroline and Sue talking. Caroline here made a lot of good points about like why I wanted to vote Gabe out last week. Sorry for leaving you out of the vote. Caroline is saying, oh, she wants to play her game. She doesn't want to play someone else's game. It's her dream, everyone's dream to come out and play Survivor. You don't want to go out there and play a game that doesn't represent you, you're not happy with. So it's like, okay, Caroline, making some good points here.
I also think it was good that she made it all about Gabe and not about Sue, in the sense that, like, she said, I only voted this way because I couldn't have Gabe controlling my game. It says nothing about my relationship with you, Sue. Because I think especially when people were seeing them as a threesome, it's like if you break away and vote off one of the threesome, then what does it say about your relationship with the other one? And basically being like, Gabe was controlling me and not letting me play my game is a lot better than like I didn't feel like I could move forward with this group of 3. So, yeah.
I agree. I think for Caroline too, it helps to differentiate her from Sue if she does want to go to the end with Sue. Now they've got something different for their resume. Last week also we were like, maybe not a good move for Caroline to flip this early. Going into this week, it seems like it was fine for Caroline. She might even be in a good spot in the Underdogs Alliance, which is yet to be seen. But I thought it was interesting that we got some Caroline home content where she's talking about growing up with ADHD. Felt like Teeny getting that content last week. I was like, okay, so Caroline getting some personal content, Teeny getting personal content. Is this something to look out for?
Yeah, is this something to look out for? I think a lot of people have been saying that they enjoy that this personal content didn't feel as shoehorned in, maybe as some other personal content. I think that some people felt like some of the sob stories in previous seasons felt like they were just shoehorned in to have sob stories rather than like actually a natural part of, what it means to be on Survivor. And I felt like this was a really good way of showing, like, the way that I am in my real life affects the way that I play Survivor. And I think that was really good for both Teeny and Caroline's content, where it's like, here's this big thing in my life that is also a big thing for me in Survivor.
I agree. I thought that this felt very natural from her wanting to play her own game to then talking about how she grew up and how like school affected her and how it comes into the game like this. I thought it was good personal content for Caroline. It'll be interesting to be like, okay, does this mean Caroline's going to make it to final three and then it comes up again in final three? Or is it just something that came up here because it was natural for her talking in confessional about wanting to play her own game?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting because I feel like sometimes this is a red herring, but like we've said before, sometimes they just like to bump up people's personal content before they go home so that when they go home, you're not like, who's this person? So I feel like Caroline especially hasn't gotten a lot of content for the amount of like time she's been in the game. So it was good to hear a little bit more from her.
It'll be interesting to see if she upticks going into the finale weeks, because then that could be a good sign. But overall, good conversation for Caroline. She didn't ruin her relationship by voting Gabe out last week, but Sue does say, I forgive Caroline. I still see her as we are number one and number two. So Caroline or Sue seems to forgive her, and that's like good for Caroline's social game.
It is definitely good for Caroline's social game. So
Yeah, so speaking of social games, we see the formation of the Underdogs Alliance with Andy, Rachel, Teeny, Caroline, and Sue. The underdogs are coming together here in order to vote out the bigger threats, which is just the other three people in the game, and Kyle, Genevieve, and Sam. I thought it was very smart to see Kyle, Genevieve, and Sam trying to link up here. I feel like like us as viewers, we were like, okay, if you see this happening, obviously you should try to stick together and do something about it. I think it's really good that these three are realizing if they don't stick together, they're going to have no numbers going into Final Seven next week. So it's like, okay, cool. We're hearing them verbalize it. This is smart from the non-underdog people.
I also feel like it's smart from the underdog people, though, because I feel like there have been previous seasons where the underdogs realize that they're underdogs, but they can't get it together enough to actually vote out one of the people who's the top threats. So I feel like both sides were playing really well. I feel like Sam and Genevieve did well not to just kind of bury their head in the sand and be like, well, if Kyle's going next, then it's fine. And they were like, okay, like, this is a problem for us too.
It's sort of like a reverse of usual seasons, I guess, because then you could say, oh, there's not really much Kyle, Genevieve, Sam can do. You just sort of have to be not the one that's voted out and make it one more day, because maybe tomorrow things are going to shake up and things will change. Basically now, like the underdogs are the big dogs, and Kyle, Sam, and Genevieve are the underdogs.
Yeah, it's a nice role reversal. I'm curious to see how long it's going to last, just because I think because they're so aware, maybe they're going to try to do something to mitigate their threat levels. Maybe there will be another wild twist where somehow Sam and Genevieve are both safe next time.
True. Jeff will make them safe, so the vote will have to split people up. I thought it was also interesting this episode. We hear Genevieve talking about not wanting to make like personal connections again. We heard her talk about it last week after the fallout of the Saul vote with her relationship with Teeny. We hear her talk about it again in the episode and at Tribal Council about like wanting to keep personal and game separated. So I think this is very interesting that it continues to come up. Like, okay, does production editing just like this storyline that's going on? Or is it going to come up maybe, okay, Genevieve versus Teeny? Genevieve won't write Teeny's name down and it's like full circle or something. It's just very interesting that this keeps on coming up for Genevieve.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that she like talks about separating Genevieve the person from Genevieve the player when like it's really not possible to like compartmentalize yourself like that. And so I also wonder if maybe that's something like if she does get to final tribal that like comes up at final tribal. I guess it could come up either as her jury question or her answering a question by the jury, because I think at the end of the day, Survivor is about relationships, and like, people vote for you not because you were the coolest and the best, but because they feel like they had a relationship with you. And I think that Genevieve saying like, oh, I don't want to be the person who crushed their dreams, you can't then also have like the positive side of relationships just because you're trying to avoid the negative side.
True. It's sort of like a double-edged sword. It's like, okay, at a certain point you do have to have personal connections and like be close with people, otherwise you won't really have any social capital, I feel like, because you have to sort of give some of that personal in order to get some back, because if nobody cared about you, they didn't know anything about your personal life, why would they want to keep you in the game, compared to, oh, I know this person's married, I know they have kids or they want kids, these are their hopes and dreams in life and in the game. You're probably more wanting to keep that person around because you feel some kind of connection to them. But also, like, that's a positive side. But negative side, if you're creating all these really deep bonds with people, more likely they're going to be a little bit bitter if and when you vote them out of the game, because they're like, yo, I thought we were close. Like, we talked about our families, we talked about our deepest, darkest things, and then you voted me out. So I can see where Genevieve's coming from, of like wanting to keep it separate, but I do feel like it would be very hard to keep it separate and then also try to win the game.
Yeah, so I think I really enjoy this storyline though, because I feel like a lot of times people game bot without like saying like, you know, I'm intentionally trying to keep this separate. But I feel like for Genevieve, she talks about like the reason I'm trying to keep this separate is because I do feel these things for these people and I know that it's not helping my game. Not like, I feel like there's a lot of game bot type content where they don't even realize the effect that they're having on other people, so it makes them come across as out of touch. So I really like this storyline. I think it's really interesting. I think Genevieve is a really interesting player, so I'm curious to see how this keeps going.
Me too. I'm very intrigued to see how the Genevieve connection storyline continues to go. And with connections, sort of like Rachel's episode here, we see her included in 2 final 3 plans. We see a Rachel, Andy, and Teeny final 3, and then we also see a Rachel, Caroline, and Stu final 3. So it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's good for Rachel because she kind of went from on the outs to now the hinge of this underdog alliance. But I'm curious to see how well this goes for her because she also told a lot of people about her new advantage. And so I feel like Rachel could very quickly become one of the overdogs instead of one of the underdogs. So I think depending on how well she walks this tightrope could depend whether or not she gets to the end.
I agree. I think this is basically like Rachel's episode. It's very good and very bad for her. Good in the sense that I think it ups her win equity if she were to make it to final 3, but also very bad because right now she's basically the top dog of the underdogs. So once it gets to final 5, the other 4 should theoretically team up and want to try to vote Rachel out coming final 4, final 5 time. And if people realize, oh, she's included in all the final 3s, that might give them more ammunition to want her to vote her out.
Yeah, but that would also require, I feel like, an awkward conversation where, like, you know, I made a final 3 deal with Rachel. Wait, I made a final 3 deal with Rachel, where, like, people have to admit to each other, like, oh, you're not a part of my final 3 plan. So it might just be like, do I blow up my game by telling you that you're not a part of my final 3 so that I can vote out Rachel? So.
Yeah. And like with win equity too, we hear Genevieve talking with Rachel saying, hey, let's try to vote out the people that are taking our spots at the end. Basically, who's the GOAT of the season. Genevieve says, let's try to vote out Sue and Andy because they're taking people's spot at the end. I think this was also very interesting because we've been talking here on the podcast. Okay, Andy on the island in confessionals, as a viewer, we're seeing Andy have a lot of agency. He's very well spoken in these confessionals. So it's interesting to see Genevieve say, okay, Andy is still the GOAT on the island. We want to drag him along to the end. He's taking up people's spot at the end. So on the island still, he might still not have that much agency. So like we've been talking about, it'll be very interesting. Okay, can he turn that perception around, or is he truly going to into final tribal council as like the person people don't really like and that they don't really respect?
Yeah, it's interesting just because I think one of the things that consistently comes up on Survivor is the difference in perception between the players on the island and the people watching at home, where it's like the players might see someone some way and viewers might see them another way. I think a lot of people get in internet fights about this. But I think it's also what we talked about last week, where sometimes you get a reputation and you just can't shake that reputation. So
Mm-hmm.
Andy's like day one meltdown might still be, his reputation that people are holding on to. And so whether or not that affects his chances at the final tribal, I think remains to be seen. But I think, in some ways, perception is reality. If people are still seeing him as a goat, he might just be a goat, even if we see that he is well spoken.
The meltdown got brought up today at the immunity challenge, so he remembers it. People probably still remember it out there. I think if Andy doesn't end up winning the season, that edit is going to hurt him if he ever comes back. And I feel like he probably would be someone that would be invited back for a future season because us as viewers are seeing, okay, he's doing all this math. He's actually strategizing. He has relationships with everyone now, which people on the island might not see, and he's not getting credit or respect for those moves. But us as viewers are like, okay, Andy's not just like the total goat out there, but he's trying to do things and he is like making these relationships. So if you're Andy and you lose this game this time, I'd be like, dang, this ruins my chances for a future season because you're getting a good edit here.
Yeah, it ruins your chances for a future season. But I don't know. I think it really does depend on like how things go for him in the end, because I feel like we've seen something kind of similar where someone who was perceived by the audience as a goat gets to the end and then wins. So maybe that's what happens, but in reverse, where someone
The
drags Andy to the
anti-Gabler.
end. Yeah, someone drags Andy to the end thinking he's a goat, and everyone else is like, actually, he's not a goat. But
So we get to the journey part of this episode. Sam and Genevieve volunteer. They want to go on the journey. Rachel sees this and is like, okay, these are the people I'm not working with. These are the people I want to vote out. So she also volunteers to draw a rock for a chance to go on the journey. I thought this was very smart. It's like what we always say, okay, why are you letting the people you want to get voted out look for idols? Why are you letting them even have the chance to go on a journey to potentially get an advantage? Sure, they could be disadvantaged and lose their vote, but they have a very big chance of getting an advantage. So I think it was very smart to try to block them from getting the advantage by putting your hat in the ring to try to go on the advantage. Just in general, might not be so good because she's putting her head out there more as someone who's strategizing and trying to make moves, and now she has another advantage coming back. But it's good because Sam or Genevieve would have gotten an advantage, a block a vote, which would be very bad going into Final 7 next week.
yeah, I feel like blocking a vote is a big power, and for Rachel, it might be worthwhile, especially because like this could be the thing that keeps Rachel safe at Final 5 if the two people that, or if the two groups of two that she's working with realize like, oh shoot, Rachel's like doing something, could be what saves her. And so I think it definitely could be risky, but I feel like the risk reward ratio is still in Rachel's favor, especially because she did get the advantage. I feel like if she had lost the game, maybe we'd be having a different conversation about the risk reward, ratio for Rachel. But I think it turned out well for her. I think blocking someone is not on your side from getting something will be worth a little bit of risk of like, maybe I'm sticking my neck out.
I agree. I think the upside is better for Rachel here. The downside would be losing your vote, but also, like, okay, if you think the underdogs are a true five-some here, losing your vote doesn't really matter in this scenario, unlike like Teeny losing their vote pre-merge. Like Rachel losing hers here wouldn't necessarily matter. I think, like you said, for her to block Sam or Genevieve from getting an advantage is an upside just in general if she lost her vote. But going on the journey, you can win the block a vote. Last time to play it would be at final 6. I thought this was a cool journey setup. The thing was in the middle of the ocean. The timer for the puzzle are weights falling into the ocean, which I thought was very cool. And I thought it was a fun visual. You have Rachel in the front of the camera view, and then the like weights and the ropes falling into the ocean behind her. I liked that because sometimes with editing cuts, you don't really know how much time is truly left on the timer or the hourglass. But here it's like, okay, no funny business could happen. We see the ropes behind her while she's moving the pieces around.
Yeah, I thought that was really fun. I feel like the ropes are definitely more stressful than the sand timers that people have, because like she was saying, you can hear the ropes, you can hear when the next weight falls into the water. Like that would stress me out.
I want to know how long the timing was. I would think, okay, maybe each rope bundle is 1 minute or 2 minutes. So it'd be 5 or 10 minutes total, maybe. So I'm like, okay, you would play the game not knowing how quick the thing is going to fall and how fast the rope bundles will untwirl there and go into the ocean. So I would say maybe 5 or 10 minutes, it seemed like. Sort of
I would
fast.
say probably more like 5 than 10. Just because when you look at the number of balls, I feel like it makes more sense for it to be 5 minutes. But
yeah, and like
either
that's so
way,
quick.
fast.
Yeah, the puzzle reminded me of the Chrissy ball puzzle that we did a DIY on our channel, where it's like, okay, for the Chrissy one, your thing was on a turntable and you had to get all of the same color balls in there. Here, better visual for TV, seeing it just all on like a 45-degree angle table rather than a flat turntable. So I thought this was a good variation of that puzzle. Easy to watch on TV.
Yeah, I feel like it's more intuitive than the circular puzzle was. I know there's a lot of like mobile games that are basically this ball puzzle where you have to like match things with the colors, but in the mobile games, there's more rules than they had in this version of Survivor. So, just saying.
Yeah, I think the turntable one is harder just because it's like you can't just move all the balls at once, but you have to turn the table to get to the like free space. But here it's like, oh, anything can just go into the free space easy.
Yeah. So, I'd be curious like what the rules were, because I feel like we didn't really get as much of like you're allowed to move like with both hands, like stuff like that. Like was it literally just freestyle? So, but I know other people probably don't care as much about the minutia of the rules as I do.
I'd want to know if people are colorblind. How like would they how would they do the puzzle?
I feel like that would be a great way to just get out of having to do the puzzle. Be like, oh, it's solved, and then when they're like, that's not solved, you can be like, it looks solved to me because I'm colorblind. Because then they can't be like, no, it's not solved, without being discriminatory. So just
Yeah, like it'd
saying.
be interesting because it's like, okay, with rock climbing, there's some people at the gym that are colorblind and like, okay, you see the colors differently, but still sometimes they're like, okay, is that like purple or black? Like, is that hold a part of my climb or is it not? So it's like, okay, you could still sort the balls, but it might just be wrong if like your color blindness might make them like too similar kind of thing.
Yeah, but maybe they also take that into account when they color the balls. Who knows?
Things we want to know. So Rachel wins the block a vote and she goes back to camp and she's telling everyone in the underdog alliance the truth about the advantage. I thought that was pretty smart. It builds trust with them. You want the 5 people to potentially, stick together. One of them might stab you in the back about knowing the block a vote, but I feel like just in general at 8, you might as well. It's not like you're telling them you have the idol, but they're going to suspect that you won something from the journey today. So you might as well share the truth. Otherwise, you're going to make the 5 people in the underdog alliance sketch about you.
Yeah, I feel like you have to share the truth. I also think Rachel's strategy of tell as much about the truth as you can is a good strategy because, like she said, people are going to disbelieve you anyway, but at least with telling mostly the truth, you aren't then trying to remember what lie you told.
Yeah, and sharing the truth, Sue really liked the confession of Rachel sharing, talked about how Gabe shared it in the early days, and that like made her want to work with Gabe. Sue really wants to work with Rachel now. So all in all, I feel like sharing it right now is the way to go, because small tribe numbers, someone's gonna blab, so you might as well be the one sharing it.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see like what this does for Sue's game. I feel like we got a lot of Sue this episode, just Sue like sharing her feelings about how she feels about other people now. But I don't know if it's that's just because like there's fewer people now, so we're naturally seeing more of everyone, or something is being set up for Sue. So
We didn't get a Sue montage of how much she hates Kyle, though, so it wouldn't be a Kyle exit episode without that.
oh, Sue.
So we get to the immunity challenge. It is a balancing, walking back and forth challenge, and you have to spell immunity with your blocks. I feel like this is a fun challenge to watch the first time you're watching through the episode, because it's like, oh, anyone can win. People are dropping. The game is so close. Not really fun to watch the second time when you know the answer of who wins.
Yeah, I feel like the ones like these, I feel like I would just rather suspense doesn't really do that much for me. Like if they win, they win, you know? So
Suspenseful the first time watching, less so all of these other times, but Rachel wins the challenge. It was close between Rachel and Kyle there at the end. A bunch of other people were semi-close to winning, but they ended up dropping. But Rachel wins. Another, good thing for her Survivor resume and like personal resume of Survivor bucket list items. Sort of bad also, like, oh, you went on the journey and you got something and now you want immunity. Like your Survivor resume is making you the top dog of the underdogs.
mm-hmm. So top dog of the underdogs would be a great tagline.
Yeah, everyone gets nicknames. So the vote is basically between Kyle versus Genevieve to go. I feel like watching this, it's like, okay, it has to be Kyle here. Sue and Caroline probably won't switch their vote to vote Genevieve out over Kyle when Kyle's up for grabs here. Sue, with all how much she hates Kyle, probably wouldn't do that. So thinking it has to be Kyle. We even hear Teeny say multiple times that they would want Kyle over Genevieve, even after Genevieve backstabbed them on the solve vote. So I was like, okay, probably Kyle here. No way Andy and Rachel will flip everyone to vote Genevieve.
Yeah, I didn't think it was going to happen either. I feel like Kyle was just too easy of a vote. So I feel like there wasn't a lot of suspense for me about who was going home.
Yeah, I thought it was also interesting with Andy's math. I feel like his math there wasn't really the right way, because he's like, okay, you only have 50% chance of winning versus losing. Then you multiply that together 4 times. But I feel like technically it changes because there's like 8 people now, 7 people now, 6 people. And then also I would say based on the challenge, you might have like more chance of winning versus less chance of winning, depending on what the challenge is. So it's like, okay, his math, makes sense, but it wasn't really like mathing with this.
Yeah, it was questionable math. I remember hearing him explain it and being like, that's not how that works. And then Caroline immediately after was like, that's not how that works. And I was like, okay, I'm glad that I was, not the only one hearing that it didn't work.
And we also hear Caroline say that if she targeted Genevieve this week, that would mean targeting Sue, which I thought was interesting because I feel like we haven't really seen too much of a Sue Genevieve relationship. So then Caroline saying targeting Jen would mean targeting Sue sort of makes it seems like maybe Sue and Genevieve have some kind of close friendship or alliance or something, that backstabbing Sue again would be bad moves for Caroline. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Maybe Sue could flip on the underdogs and work with Genevieve next week.
Yeah. We'll have to see what happens, though. I feel like the underdogs are not a solid enough alliance yet where I'm like, yes, they're going to definitely stick together. But I also I'm curious what pitch each of them would have to be made in order to, flip on the underdogs, because I feel like right now most of them do benefit from staying in that alliance.
I agree. I feel like the underdogs should stick together going into voting Genevieve out at least. Maybe you break up with Sam because obviously in a 5-person alliance, you 3-2, someone's going to be in the 2. So you'd use Sam to try to flip things up. But I would still say you should stick together to try to get Genevieve out, because Genevieve, if she made it to the end after like this rise and fall and rise again, that could probably get a lot of good jury votes of like being threatening, almost being voted out, working your way back from that and making it to the end. And also, Genevieve is dangerous because we've seen her even this episode. Oh, let's vote Andy out. Let's vote Sue out. She's trying to pull people. She's trying to make moves. It's not like she's just sitting there. Okay, I'm next on the chopping block. I'm not going to do anything about it. But she's still trying to pull people in. So I'd still say you'd want to vote her out because that's definitely very dangerous.
Definitely is very dangerous. So I feel like Genevieve, unless she wins, will probably be the next one to go. But I feel like she's also good enough at finagling that maybe it's not as obvious as we think it is.
Some wild twist will happen next week. But in Tribal Council, Kyle was fighting well at Tribal, trying to throw other people on under the bus, basically saying, oh, even though I've won 4 times, that doesn't mean anything. People get to the end having won a lot of immunities, but they don't win the game. And I was like, oh, good. Kyle is trying to fight to stay in the game. I feel like we haven't really seen too much of his strategy this season. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, he's got strategy, and what he's saying to get the scent off his back is really good.
Yeah, I feel like he did do really well in pitching himself. But I think ultimately people aren't voting Kyle off because they think that he's a threat to win the game. They're voting Kyle off because him winning immunity blocks them from winning immunity. And some people need to win immunity or feel like they need to win immunity in order to move forward. So I feel like that's the thing. That's kind of the real sticking point. Other people want to be able to win immunity because a well-timed immunity win can really help your game.
Definitely. And Kyle does have a good story with his upbringing and stuff like that. And like Sue saying, oh, Kyle's poor. He talks about how poor he is all the time. That could be a good point that people maybe want to award him for at the end of the game. So his votes could get, or his story could get votes at the end. And also, he just seems like a stand-up dude, like hugging everyone after being voted out. Seems like, people might like him, so they might want to vote for him.
Yeah, I feel like if Kyle returns, he's definitely going to return as like a hero in like a heroes versus villain season, just because like literally Gabe said when he was voted out, like, oh, he's such a hero. And I feel like that's definitely like Kyle's impression. Like he's just such a solid, good guy.
I also thought it was cool, Caroline bringing up Genevieve's noise versus news quote at Tribal. We liked this quote when it came up and brought it up on the podcast, and then it comes up again here. I was like, it was a really good quote. I did really like it too.
I also liked it when Jeff was like, and who said that? So I was like, I feel like Jeff knew, but he just wanted to remind people who maybe didn't remember. But also, I'm kind of like, Jeff, everyone remembers that quote. Come on. So
it was a good quote.
It was a great quote.
I was sort of sad. Sue on her parchment wrote Tweedledee or Tweedledum, one of them on there, but Jeff didn't read her vote.
Yeah, I feel like that would have been too much to explain. So
yeah, Kyle gets voted out, seemingly, as it should be, because Kyle did not win immunity. You should vote him out here. Bad for him, maybe, to vote Gabe out last week, but alas, Kyle got voted out, and it does definitely open up who can win immunity going into the final 7 next week.
Yeah, so looking forward to a fun little shakeup.
Yeah, I'm excited. So let us know in the comments down below. Do you think Rachel should have gone on the journey? Should she have tried to maybe get someone else in her alliance to volunteer to go on the journey? Do you think she's making her target a little bit too big, that she's going to be voted out sooner in the Underdogs Alliance? Let us know in the comments down below. As we said, I'm very excited for the finale coming up, or part 1 and part 2 next week. So yeah, let us know in the comments your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you all next time.